This video is sponsored by Squarespace. What's going on, guys? Billy here, and the Mavic 3 is a little over a year old. It's hard to believe that this drone came out in 2021. It feels like it came out just the other month. It feels brand new, and I think the reason behind this is because of all of the firmware updates that we've gotten that have added brand new features and functionality over this drone's lifespan. Not to mention, we also got an entirely new version of this drone in late 2022 called the Mavic 3 Classic, which removed the telephoto camera, therefore making the drone less expensive. We'll touch more on this towards the end of the video. To focus more on the updates that this drone has received, here is all of the major changes that came by way of firmware updates. The full patch notes were a bit more lengthy with smaller updates and changes, and I'll leave a list of every single change made in each firmware update down in the description for your reference. These notes here on the screen, though, are each of the major changes that were added to the Mavic 3 over the past year, and as you can tell, we have quite a bit to cover. Before we do this, though, I need to address the elephant in the room, and that is the lack of features that this drone released with. I mean, you look at all the major changes that I just shared with you up on the screen, things like ActiveTrack, HLG, Panorama, Quick Shots. These are all features that we'd expect to come shipped in a drone from DJI on day one, but they were delayed and added through future firmware updates. Now, I'm a little bit on the fence about this because personally, I could care less about some of those smart features. To me, a drone that flies well and a drone that captures a beautiful photo and video is really all that's important. And all of those other features that came by way of firmware update down the line were nice to have, but again, weren't really something I necessarily needed from day one. Like last year, I traveled to a ton of different places, and I credit the Mavic 3 for enabling me to capture these spots that I went to in the best way possible. From the flight characteristics to the insane flight time to using the RC Pro to, of course, that camera, this drone actually made me want to fly more and capture more aerial photos and videos. It was such an effortless experience. By the way, the footage that you're watching is from my 2022 aerial recap video, which is over 9 minutes of my best aerial footage captured last year. If you haven't seen it yet, I'll leave a link below and in the top corner because it's personally one of my favorite videos that I've ever put together. With that said, the Mavic 3, when it first came out, was the best drone, hands down, that you could purchase on the market, and now a year and a half later, it still holds that title after all of these changes. So why don't we take a little trip down memory lane and see what DJI has done over the past year and a half to beef this drone up to where it sits today. All right, so the first update we received was in December of 2021. So this was like the first month after the drone released, and this was kind of like cleaning up some issues and just addressing some things sort of as a formality, right? It's like the initial update that comes out once everybody gets it in their hands and they find little things wrong with the drone. So they added focus track, master shots, and hyperlapse. Thank God they added hyperlapse that quick because that's a mode that I use all the time. You guys know I've been posting hyperlapses like crazy over on my Instagram. They also added the option to capture raw only photographs, which is nice because I never liked having to capture raw and JPEG images and then just trash the JPEG. So that was a good addition. They also reduced the noise in ProRes on the Mavic 3 Cine. I didn't really notice a big difference, but I kind of thought that was a huge change just because they're addressing the actual video quality. So I did add it here in this list. They also reduced some occasional vibration of the aircraft arms in certain scenarios. I personally didn't encounter this, but this is definitely something that's scary to experience. You might think your drone is going to fall from the sky, so it's nice they addressed that super quick. They also improved RTH performance, they improved obstacle avoidance performance, and they also improved hover stability. So again, this was like a lot of just general cleanup that kind of made the drone just a little bit better right after release. Now moving into the second update that the Mavic 3 received, this came in January of 2022, so just 2 months after the drone's release and just 1 month after that initial firmware update. This added a lot of shooting modes that weren't available from day one and weren't available after that first update. So again, this is kind of adding things that probably should have been there on day one. So we got quick shots. These are like droney, rocket, circle, helix, boomerang, and asteroid. We're familiar with these since back like with the Mavic Air. That was when they first came out. We also got the panorama shooting mode as well as the burst shooting mode added when capturing photos. We also could now digitally zoom when capturing video in the normal color. We could also add a color display assist when capturing video in D-Log, so it could give us an understanding of what the video would look like when it was color graded, and that can help us properly expose the image. They also added quick transfer for transferring files quickly between your phone, your remote controller, and your device. They also added support support for setting a return to home altitude for advanced return to home. And then finally, just some miscellaneous things. They also added USB mode for the Mavic 3 Cine. So now when you plugged the Mavic 3 Cine in order to access the files on your internal SSD, it would actually turn the fans off, turn the motors off, turn off the gimbal. So you wouldn't have the drone actually still turned on. It would just be accessing the actual hard drive or the SSD inside of the drone. They also optimized the accuracy of the color correction from these drones. Really, it's not a huge change that I noticed, but I figured I'd mention it because I love the colors from the drone, and whatever they did, they made the colors look great right off the bat and with this update as well. And finally, they increased the image sharpness from the tele camera, that second lens on the Mavic 3 Standard and the Mavic 3 Cine. So this is like the first initial update that they did to this secondary camera to make it a little bit more usable, and you'll see that in future firmware updates, they continue to try to make it better. Now, before we get into the rest of the updates that the Mavic 3 received, I want to share a quick word from this video sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is a platform that I've personally been using before I even started posting videos to my YouTube channel here 6 years ago. I first built my portfolio using Squarespace's platform because of their templates that are stylish, functional, and easy to customize. I didn't need to learn how to code, I didn't need any previous experience, and I didn't need to spend an exorbitant amount of money to hire someone to build it from scratch. Instead, I was able to work at my own pace and choose my best photographs to add them to my template and customize it to be exactly how I wanted. In my case, I have a simple design with a black background and minimal text to keep the focus on the images. Squarespace goes even deeper with detailed analytics so I can see who's looking at my website. They even have integrated SEO tools so that I can get my work seen by more people online, and if I choose to do so, I can start an online store right within Squarespace's platform to sell prints, presets, or anything else photography related. So a special thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video and helping me display my work online for over half a decade. Okay, moving on to the next update here. This came in March of 2022, so this was about 4 months after the initial release of the Mavic 3, and I'd say that this is probably the most significant update they were received because it fixed a huge issue, a massive bug that people were experiencing with their drones, and that is the fact that you couldn't establish a GPS connection quickly. I did some tests like out in an open field on a golf course. I then brought it to a side street in Old City, which was a really tough environment, and I can confirm that my drone, my Mavic 3, took minutes, sometimes over 10 minutes, to establish a GPS connection, get enough satellites to then establish my home point, which basically prevented me from flying. As you know, when you establish that home point, you can then fly further away, you can fly up higher, but up until you establish the home point, you're like limited to 100 feet, and this drone was not establishing its home point as quickly as, say, the Air 2S or the Phantom 4 Pro or any of those older drones. But luckily, with this one firmware update, they fixed it and all was back to normal. So that was a huge issue that we had to deal with for like the first 4 months, but now that that's over, this drone is operating just like any other drone when it comes to establishing its home point and connecting to satellites. Now, moving into our next firmware update, I remember when this came out in May of 2022, so just 2 months after the March update that fixed the GPS bug, I called this the final big firmware update that the Mavic 3 would receive because it added all the features I thought were missing, but I was wrong. We'll get more into that here shortly, but through this update, they added the telecamera photo mode, so now we could capture a single photo, we could capture AEB, all exposure bracketed photos, we could do burst shooting, time shot, and other sub modes. We also now could take manual control over the exposure, which was nice. They also gave us different video shooting modes with the telephoto camera, so now we could do 4K at 25, 30, and 50 FPS, and we could shoot 1080p at 25, 30, and 50 FPS. We could also adjust our exposure manually when capturing video, but I'd say that this was the big overhaul to the telephoto camera that actually made it a good, viable option to use because those photos that came out when zoomed in at 7x at its optical zoom, it looks really, really good. Now, moving on from there, we also had HLG added for our main camera, which is something that probably should have been there from the beginning. Personally, I love the color so much that I just shoot in the normal color profile, but HLG is there for those of you that are kind of embedded in that HLG workflow. We also got 1080p at up to 200 frames per second added when we're capturing slow motion video with our main camera. So now we could do like super, super slow motion video. I didn't think that they would do this, but they also gave us different ProRes codecs. So we got 422 LT and 422 just regular. So now we were actually able to take advantage of some different codecs when capturing with the Mavic 3 Cine. We also now could capture hyperlapses in a 1 second interval, which has kind of given me a more creative spin on how to do these hyperlapses. Like you can really speed up the motion in your frame. It could really look cool. So the Mavic 3 Cine is personally my favorite drone to hyperlapse with because of that feature right there. We now could also use the wide angle lens to use within intelligent flight mode. So for example, we could use use the wide angle lens when capturing hyperlapses and doing master shots and focus track and quick shots. We could also use it like for ActiveTrack and things like that. So that's cool to be able to use that on the drone and have access to different flight modes and different shooting modes. We also had the nifty bypass option added through APAS 5.0, which is something that I never used because they put a disclaimer in their patch notes saying like the drone might crash, but basically the drone was now more fluid when trying to dodge obstacles. It seems like their approach at trying to take on Skydio, but I know that some people were crashing their drones when using this, so just a fair warning. Also, DJI came out with that new RC that was then added through this update in terms of compatibility, so now you could use the RC with the Mavic 3. So after that big firmware update in May, we actually got another firmware update in November, so this is now 6 months after our last update, and it's actually a full year after the drone has actually come out, and they added some features that I never thought would actually be added into the Mavic 3, and this was kind of bundled with the release of the Mavic 3 Classic. So we got a new night mode for capturing video, which basically allows us to crank the ISO up to 12,800, and I was able to get some phenomenal looking shots using that night video because they just look brighter than previously shooting at our maximum of 6,400 ISO. So that was definitely a welcome change I didn't expect to see. Kind of in the same vein, we could also capture D-Log video at up to 1,600 ISO. They also added some of the focus track flight modes into the telecamera, so now you can access spotlight or point of interest to get those really cool parallax shots as you moved the drone around, and it made it easier to focus on a subject because, as you know, being that far zoomed in could make things difficult and you could end up sending the camera looking all over the place. So this definitely made certain shots when capturing video with the telecamera a lot easier. They also added cruise control, so now you could tell the drone in which direction that you wanted it to fly, and then you could press a custom button on the back to actually enable cruise control and let the drone continue to fly at its current speed, whether it be forwards, backwards, up, down, in whichever direction you want. Press that button and it would just continue to fly along that path without having to provide any input on the sticks. They also added gain and expo tuning. This is huge. This allows me to actually now customize how my drone flies and how it responds to stick input. You can also tweak the maximum flight speed, the brake sensitivity, as well as other settings. So this was huge. And also at the bottom here, they added support for remote ID. So everything is all great from top to bottom. We get all these great features and they added support for remote ID. They snuck that one in there in this update. Now, the final update that we've received for the Mavic 3 here came in December, and they kind of followed up a very, very big update with another big update by adding waypoints. So now with the Mavic 3 Classic, the Mavic 3 Standard, and the Cine, you can now access the waypoints flight mode and make use of automated flights that you can repeat over and over again. This is something that people have been literally asking me for years. So the fact that DJI has finally now added it to their top of the line drone is great because I know that people have wanted access to this for some time now. And personally, it's going to make my construction jobs so much easier because I can now map out my flight on my first visit. And every time I go back, I can repeat the same exact photos and the same videos over and over and over again. And it makes it really easy. Now, software updates are not the only way that the Mavic 3 has been improved over its lifespan. We also got some new hardware, as in a new drone, the Mavic 3 Classic. They came out with basically the same drone, the same airframe that has everything similar from the software to the obstacle avoidance sensors to the flight time to the battery. Everything is exactly identical between the Mavic 3 Standard and Cine and the Mavic 3 Classic. The only difference is they got rid of the telephoto camera, therefore dropping its price. Personally, I've actually been flying my Mavic 3 Classic more often than my Mavic 3 Cine for the sheer fact that it's less of a liability in the air. It's less expensive than the Mavic 3 Cine if, God forbid, I crash and needed to get it fixed or needed to get it repaired. I personally never shoot in ProRes, so therefore I don't need the built-in SSD, and the telephoto camera never got much use either, despite all the improvements that have been made through those firmware updates. Some of the videos that I shared with you at the beginning of this video, like the shots around San Francisco, were actually captured with my Mavic 3 Classic, and because it has the same main camera, the same 4/3 sensor, the colors and dynamic range are on point, giving you awesome looking photos and videos. So while the Mavic 3 Classic isn't technically an upgrade, it still is a step in the right direction, making a great drone less expensive by removing a feature that not many people need. I mean, let's be real, right? The Mavic 3 Standard went for $2,050 and the Mavic 3 Classic goes for $1,599, making it a lot more affordable and a lot more attainable for that person that might be looking to upgrade their drone or maybe even buy their first drone, right? The Air 2S was always such a good deal at $1,000, but now I think that for the extra $600, all that you get in the Mavic 3 Classic is definitely worth jumping up to that next drone. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts on the Mavic 3 Classic, the Mavic 3 Cine, and the Mavic 3 Standard. I think that the evolution has just been great over the past year, over the past couple of months. All these additions, all these features, and I wonder if DJI is done. Like, do they have any more firmware updates in store? Because I wouldn't have guessed that they added night mode or waypoints, so they could have some more stuff up their sleeve. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and as always, I'll talk to you later. Peace.